This is when I was on RVN TV live. Hope you enjoy it.
And kind of the background and how you're coming on here. Can you introduce yourself and tell us your name, who you are, where you're from, and most importantly, the name of the podcast that you host? And I'll jump into those questions related to that. So go ahead, tell us who you are.
Okay, I'm Jordan Von Erickson. I'm from Seattle. I am 31 years old, and the name of my podcast is the Straight Outta BS podcast.
I love that name. I love your name. So talk to me about the subject matter of the podcast and how or why you developed it.
Okay, I developed this podcast, one, to give people a platform to share their stories. I believe everybody's story deserves to be heard. And I'm just all about the truth. The truth doesn't care if you like it or not. It's just the truth. So I'm always about getting the truth out there, and I feel the best way to do that is to get everybody's unique story, because everybody's going to have a different take on their experiences in these boarding schools and whatnot. So I feel like that's the best education, is for people to share their stories.
Absolutely. So having said that, and you talking about boarding schools, I talked about breaking code silence. So I'd like you to take a couple of minutes and to tell us your story. Give us a summary of the school that you attended, the number of years that you were there, and what you went through, who sent you, any of the details that you would like to share as it relates to your experience with breaking code silence, boarding schools. Go ahead.
Okay, so my parents tricked me into transporting me to a place called SpringCreekLodgeAcademy in Thompson Falls, Montana. I got there on January 23rd, 2007, and I was there 22 months. When I first got there, I pretty much felt betrayed, and I just was like, watch me act out and get pulled, essentially. I'm going to try and act out so much that you'll have to come get me. So I rebelled for my first year there, spent a lot of time in intervention, worksheets. Solitary confinement is also known as the Hobbit intervention. They're the same thing. So I spent a lot of time there in study hall or worksheets. Essentially just write sentences. And then after that, when I got threatened with Jamaica, they were about to send me to Jamaica, I decided to start working my program. And from that point on, I got through all the seminars and eventually graduated. And I was actually the last person to graduate from there before the place was shut down.
Wow. Okay. So just a couple of questions as it relates to that and my knowledge behind, that's why I'm going to ask some of these. So one is, first, can you tell us how old you were when you walked in through the door that day?
16 and a half. About.
16. Okay. So pretty much you were a kid. And where did you think you were going?
My parents had initially told me that we were going to check out a alternative school. Well, not an alternative school. They said we were going to check out this school. They didn't say alternative, but they said they were going to check out this school. And I thought it was initially going to be like somewhere, downtown Seattle or like Capitol Hill or Bellevue or something. And I'd been tired from the night before because I had kind of been sneaking out and doing a few things, not hard drugs, but just sneaking out and whatnot. So I was tired. So I was sleeping most of the time, and I kept on waking up periodically during the trip. And I kept on asking, where are we actually going? And they wouldn't tell me. And so I initially, I had no idea.
Yeah. Did they transport you, or were you transported?
They transported me.
Okay. And much like most of the school, well, first of all, I can tell you that the threat of being sent to Jamaica was a constant theme across multiple schools, but I assume, and because you said seminars, so brainwashing seminars, denial of food, are those being restrained? Are those, am I hitting on the right subjects?
One you missed was sleep deprivation. Sleep deprivation, not adequate food, and just like brainwashing, repetitive put downs. Each facilitator ran them differently, but the essential thing was brainwashing, break you down to then build you back up into what they envisioned you should be or whatnot.
Yeah. Looking back now, would you say that you were a troubled teen, or were you just being a teenager?
I feel like a little bit of both, honestly.
Okay.
I feel like I was troubled, but maybe not by my own, because of something I did. I just felt like I was adopted at birth, and a bunch of things just in my life made me feel like that I might be troubled. But then also I was acting out a little bit.
Sure.
No hard drugs, but I was definitely sneaking out.
Yeah.
And whatnot.
I mean, that is something that happens in the teenage world, and as a parent, what we're supposed to do. Did I hear you correctly say that you were adopted?
Yes, I was adopted at birth.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I want to also ask, do you have a relationship with your parents today or no?
My birth parents?
No, your parents that put you in the school.
Yes, I have a relationship with both my parents, yeah.
Okay. And you said that school had been shut down?
Yeah, it got shut down due to a bunch of lawsuits. I'm not particular onto these. I know one of them was a girl had hung and killed herself. I know that was one of the lawsuits, but there were, from what I hear, there's a bunch of lawsuits, but I'm not particular on the exact.
Sure.
I just know that the suicide was for sure.
Yeah. I mean, that is not an uncommon theme as it relates to any of that. So one of the things I want to ask you is, and that's one of the things that we focus on this show, is what do you think helped you to get through those 22 months that you were there? And then, one of the reasons why I report on this is because, we know that abuse as a child, has a ripple effect that carries forward into adult life and all. What got you through those 22 months when you were in that school? Let's start there. What do you think it was?
To be completely honest, the relationships that I made with people in there was probably like right up there at the top, just because in there, people are real. Like you see their real exposed, like full self, like what they've been through, what they, like how they felt about it. Like you know all of that. So you really get to know somebody inside and out. And there's a certain trust there that I haven't really been able to replicate even on the outside. So definitely relationships. That might be about it, like honestly.
Yeah. Well, the reason why I can like feel that from you is because that is a common answer in regards to individuals that we've interviewed on this show, that it was either the brotherhood or the sisterhood or whatever, experiencing something so awful together, and being able to go through that. But it is a testament to who you are as an individual, because as you and I both know, that not everybody did get through the time period when they are at that school, as well as afterwards when they have to come back into society and get back up on their feet. And a lot of people really struggled with that, and I'm sure that you've seen that. And that's one of the reasons why I have such respect for any individual that's able to go through that, come out of it, and then somehow is sitting here with me being able to talk about it is a huge thing. So a lot of respect for you. So, I know I asked you about the relationship with your parents and all, but like, are your parents still together? Did you have other siblings? Do you communicate with any of them? Like, what does that look like for you in terms of your family today?
Okay, honestly, when I was about to graduate from there, and I apologize for the car alarms, somebody's car alarm's going off, but honestly, like when I was right about to graduate from the program, my parents came up and they sat me down and they were like, we're gonna get a divorce when you come out, so you're gonna have to, pretty much in the sense they said, you're gonna have to learn how to deal with that. They came up to pretty much warn me and let me know a few weeks beforehand, but still, even with the warning, that kind of devastated me. So my parents are divorced now. My whole life they were telling me, don't have to worry about that, we're gonna stay together. So it took me it was crazy, man. It was hard when they told me that. And so they're divorced, and that was really hard, seeing my dad go through heartbreak.
Yeah.
They were together for more than 30 years. And so that was, I feel like that might have been one of the catalysts that actually led me to start doing hard drugs when I got out of the program.
I understand.
Thanks.
Cool. So here's what I want to do, Jordan, is I want to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about what life looks like today as it relates to you doing the podcast, because Breaking Code Silence movement that has taken place. He has agreed to come on and talk about his story, but more so what I really wanted to focus on is what he's doing today to help make a difference. And I know we had to kind of talk about this story in order to get here. So, Jordan, thank you once again for coming on the show. First, if you could just one more time just say the name of your podcast. Let's start there.
So my podcast is called the Straight Outta BS podcast.
And why is it called BS?
I used it as an acronym. BS can mean bullshit or it can mean boarding school. So, and bullshit is kind of a moniker. I'm sorry, could I swear?
Oh yeah, you're fine.
Okay. I mean, bullshit is a moniker. It could mean a whole range of things.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. So, let's talk about why it's important to have podcasts like you have that tell these stories.
Because I feel like people's stories is the only real way to spread education. If you have, like, everybody's experience is going to be their experience, right? The truth doesn't matter if you like it or not. So if you have people coming on that have bias opinions or whatnot, they're going to be pushing it one way or the other. But in my opinion, when you have people on there just telling their story, it's not coming from a 100% bias. I mean, they might be biased a little bit because they had a all negative experience or all positive experience, but overall, I feel like everybody sharing their own experience is the best way to spread education because it's not as bias leaning as a lot of these other people that I've seen interview.
Mm-hmm. And we know, and I get, my chest starts to close up whenever I say these words, that some of these schools are actually still in operation. And would you say that having people come on and talking about their stories, it's twofold. Number one, if there's somebody out there that's listening and they happen, maybe they're in the process of considering sending their child to one of these schools, it may change their mind. But additionally to that is to let people know that schools like this are out there and they should be shut down. Would you say that that's part of the factor in what you're doing?
Definitely. I feel like that's, education is the best way to get, new legislation passed. And I definitely agree. That's definitely another factor in why I do what I do, for sure.
Yeah. And I know just from doing this show that we've had individuals come on and they've told their story, and whether it's Breaking Code Silence, it really kind of doesn't matter. That, what ends up happening is people see that and they can understand, they can connect with it. Maybe their story is similar, maybe it's identical, and all of a sudden this magical thing happens in regards to them not feeling alone any longer. Can you, how do you feel about that? Do you see that as something that your podcast brings to it?
Definitely. I've actually got a few comments of people that have told me, thanks to your podcast, I don't feel so alone, or I thought I was alone and nobody else could relate to what I'd been through until I saw your podcast, and now, maybe I want to share my story, or, I don't feel so alone, or, I was going to cause harm to myself, but now I listen to your podcast, I definitely I've gotten emails like that and stuff, so that's, warms my heart to hear that stuff, and that's, that's why I'm here, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to give people this platform to share whatever they feel they need to share, and get things off their chest. Suppressing things is not healthy.
No, never. Walk us through what the format looks like, the length of time, how long do you do your interviews? Are they all structured around the same amount of time, or does it vary? Tell us what it looks like.
So my template has been essentially I usually schedule them for like 2 in the afternoon, and then, once we start talking, I just let the conversation flow as it's going to flow, and however long you need to get things off your chest. If you need to talk for 5 or 6 hours, even 10 hours, I'll let you talk for that long. It doesn't matter. If that it's your story, and however your story, you want your story to be heard and received or whatever, I'm going to present it like that. I don't even do editing. Like, I just, what you say is what you get when you listen to my podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the questions I always ask is anybody that has come from the Breaking Code Silence world is that, what kind of ripple effects have you, what lasting effects have you faced in regards to, being in those circumstances and situations? But for you, I get to also add on to it, does you doing your podcast and the storytelling, does that help in your continued healing? Because it is a continuate, it is always going on in regards to improving upon yourself and that healing process. Do you get the benefit out of, what does that do for you in regards to doing the storytelling? And
so that question is twofold. So overall, what I got from the program, how it's affected me in the long run, is I'm honestly always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Especially when I was first getting out, I was like, even to this day, when it comes to approaching a woman, for example, and saying hi or whatnot, I still have a problem doing it, because I just started to recently realize that maybe that's because I wasn't allowed to look at women in the program for so long. Mm-hmm. I wasn't allowed. It was consequenced. It was looked down upon. So things like that, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. And just feeling like nobody would understand, even if, when I first got out, my friends would be talking about, what they did that summer and whatnot. And, I'd be thinking, how could I even interject, and how could I even start a conversation about where I've been for the past 22 months? You wouldn't understand. I can tell you in 10 different ways, but you're not going to understand unless you were there, or unless you had a similar experience. So that definitely affected me overall in the long run. And doing this podcast, it's rewarding, but I'm going to be honest, I sometimes I do too much. And me being an empath, every story I take in and I multiply by a factor of 10 or so. And so I take everything in and internalize it. And so I'm probably going to have to slow down, maybe do 3 or 4 a week instead of doing them every day, just for my mental health. But definitely I feel the positives outweigh the negatives, for sure.
100%.
I just want to point that out there, that it does impact.
It's great. It really is. And you jumped to one of the questions I wanted to ask you in regards to the heaviness of the stories, and making sure that you're not re-victimizing yourself through that process, because it really is a lot. I know just from myself, but what do you do to, I don't know, put yourself in a better state of mind, to relax, to what gets you out of that funk and in hearing, the stories over again? What do you do for Jordan?
Journaling has worked really well for me. Journaling if I feel a certain way. I write lyrics too. I write my own music.
Nice.
I make beats. I try and invest that energy into something positive in my life, maybe improving my podcast more if it doesn't bring that up about what I just heard too much. Usually a day of recuperation, maybe a day in between each one to just recuperate and regenerate kind of.
Yeah.
Would be good. That's usually what I do. Yeah.
I think it's great, and I want to back you up on this, and just kind of give people a little bit of backstory, because you're right, they may not be able to connect with what it is that you're speaking about. So from my experience in doing multiple interviews and having a best friend that went through this situation, you are pretty much isolated in a school with no outside influence in regards to what is going on, as it even relates to pop culture, to your friends. You are pretty much silenced from speaking. So of course, not even just the whole, not being able to speak to girls, but not even being able to speak for multiple times. You talked about being put into isolation, and I don't think, into solitary confinement. I don't think people necessarily grasp what impact that has on an adolescent brain that is being, in formation still. So of course, you're going to come out of that and not really understand the world on the outside, and like you said so well, the other shoe to drop, and that's ever so true. So I wanted to ask you, and we talked about this, and there was a reason why, in regards to you having a relationship with your family. Are they aware of the podcast that you do, and that the stories that you're telling?
Yes, both of my parents are aware. My dad has some mental, not disability, but he has some mental issues now with his age. I'm just going to say that. And, they both know. My dad, he knows about it, but I will say that he does ask me on regular occasion how that affected me, and the fact that that's always on his mind definitely does kind of mess with me. I don't want him to feel any guilt. So, Dad, if you see this, I don't want you to feel any guilt. If I had to go through that, if I could choose to go through that again or not, I would go through it again, just because it made me the person that I am, and I don't have any regrets for that. I don't want you to feel any guilt. But yeah, my mom also does know for sure, and
Great.
She supports me.
They are aware of your story and what you went through, and would it be safe to say that they weren't really quite aware of the depth of what you were going through at the time? As many parents, they were also kind of not well informed, so to speak. But they have heard your story, obviously, they believe you.
Yeah, my mom believes me, but I don't feel like either of my parents, my dad more so, because I just don't want to add weight to his chest. So my mom, I told her how it affected me, but like I said, unless you were there, you really don't know exactly how it really felt to be dropped off, and just them dropping me off there, that image plays through my head.
Yes.
Over and over again, just them dropping me off and my dad crying and I'm really sorry, I never wanted to do this, and
Yeah. Now, you know what, Jordan? I really, honestly, I appreciate your transparency in telling that, because I think it's super important, and no wonder people are going to feel comfortable enough to speak with you. So, just a couple more questions as we move towards the end of this. What's your end goal with the podcast? What would you like to see happen? What do you want to achieve?
Get education out there and spread awareness as far as possible, and maybe eventually get a nonprofit set up to maybe help teens in crisis, teens get counseling, get resources if they're homeless, if they're struggling with addiction.
There's a saying.
Open.
Yeah. No. It's great.
And also,
there's a saying that is, be the person that you needed when you were a teenager. And, I can totally see you doing that. So a couple things. One is, how can people find your podcast?
Okay, so if you go on YouTube, it's STR8 and then space OUTTA space B.S. space PODCAST. It's a Straight Outta BS podcast on YouTube. And then also, I'm on most podcast platforms. So if you search for Straight Outta BS podcast on pretty much Anchor Radio, Spotify, Radio Public, Castbox, there's a couple of extra that I'm forgetting right now, but
it's okay.
Straight Outta BS podcast, if you look it up, you'll find it on several platforms.
Yeah, and just also so that you're aware, we have your logo of the podcast on the monitor down by your name and all. So, and I also want to ask as well too, how often does a new episode come out, or is there a particular day? Like, what does that look like for you?
Honestly, I've been pumping out content really fast. Honestly, like when I first started, I was doing every day for a while. So you might get a podcast like every day, but more than likely you'll probably get like 2, 3 a week, maybe 4, just because I want to be fair with my mental health and whatnot.
Yes.
I don't want to put myself down. No.
Yeah. And the other thing I wanted to ask is, well, one, do you know how many you have done at this point? Do you? I mean, it could be a guess number if you want. Like,
I think like 27 or 28, including the live stream.
that's a great number. That's a really great number. Good for you. And I know that you and I talked about. I said I would have you come on this show, and I would love to take an opportunity to sit down and talk with you on your podcast if you are willing to do that, and
Sounds good,
be a
man.
guest, and we could share horror stories of being a host of a show and interviewing people. But I thoroughly enjoy speaking with you. So one of the things is that it's a very good possibility that somebody out there is watching this. You and I are both in the same groups as it relates to Breaking Code Silence, but there's a very good possibility that somebody has never spoken about anything that's happened, but they see this, they can relate to it, and all of a sudden they want to start talking, or they want to reach out to you. What is the best way for somebody to do that? How can somebody find you? And this is the part where you are free to give out whatever information you want. It could be email, it could be website, whatever.
Okay, so in general for interviews, and if you have me added on social media, just send me a direct message. I go by Lucifer Morningstar, so that's LUCIPURR space MORNINGSTAR. Or I also have an account that's specifically for the Straight Outta BS podcast, which is under my actual name, Jordan Von Erickson. So you can find me on social media that way. I'm also on Instagram, but my social media, Facebook has pretty much all the links, and so does the YouTube channel. So if you go to the YouTube channel, you can see all the links for my social media. They should be up there.
That's perfect.
And but also my email, direct email for the Straight Outta BS podcast would be Straight Outta BS podcast. So that's STRAOUTTABSPODCAST@gmail.com. And then I check that email every day. And also, if anybody wants to donate to the podcast directly or support the podcast, I've opened my merch store now. I have mugs, I have phone covers, t-shirts, kid shirts, baby shirts, all sorts of merch. I have one design so far, so if you want to support the podcast that way, I only get a certain percentage. All money that I get received goes towards bettering the podcast and whatnot. And if you want to donate directly, donate to Cash App, which would be $COOKIEFAM 4, and that's my Cash App if you want to donate directly. And then also I have music as well, so if you want to add me on SoundCloud or BandLab, my username is LUCIPURR space MACABRE space BIZZLE. That's Lucifer Macabre Vizzle. And that's about it for
You know what? You are a talented individual on so many levels, but I think the one talent that rings through, and it has since the very first day that you contacted me, and that is your kind heart. And I see that in your commitment to wanting to better things, and just you messaging out to your dad. I just think you are an upstanding guy, and you are, if there's ever a day that you think you're not making a difference, I hope you come back to this show and look at this broadcast and realize that you are. And as we're coming to the end of this, the only thing I can say are just 2 words, and that is thank you. Thank you for getting through those rough years and coming here today and speaking to the story and doing what you're doing. Keep doing it. Don't stop.
For sure, man. I don't plan on it.
Awesome. All right, that's our show. Thank you so much for watching, and be sure to catch his podcast after you've watched this broadcast, and then I'll be posting when I'm going to be interviewed on his show, and you can follow it as well too. So thank you all so much for watching. Have a good night.
Bye.